Picture this: a thick, choking fog rolls through the gaslit streets of London, muffling the sounds of the city and turning every shadow into a potential threat. It's on a night like this, in the familiar comfort of 221B Baker Street, that the most extraordinary puzzles have a way of finding their way to Sherlock Holmes. The fire crackles in the hearth, casting long, dancing shapes across the walls, and Dr. John Watson is just settling into his armchair with the evening paper when a sharp, urgent knock echoes through the quiet apartment. That single sound, a disruption in the stillness, is all it takes to pull them from repose and into the heart of another enigma. There's a certain electricity in the air when a new case arrives, an unspoken understanding between the two men that the ordinary is about to be overturned by the inexplicable. The client is a woman, her face pale and strained beneath the brim of her damp hat, her hands clutching a worn leather handbag as if it were a lifeline. She speaks in a hushed, hurried tone, her story as strange as any Holmes has ever recorded. It begins not with a murder or a theft, but with a cat, a creature she describes as sleek, black and possessed of only a single luminous green eye. This is no ordinary pet. It appears and vanishes with an almost spectral silence, and its arrival has coincided with a series of unsettling events. A feeling of being watched, the faint scent of perfume where none should be, and a single, perfect white lily left on her doorstep each morning. She is not a woman prone to fancy, she insists, but the fear in her eyes is real, a palpable thing that fills the room. This, then, is the peculiar case of the one-eyed cat, a mystery that seems, on its surface, almost trivial. Yet, as any devoted follower of Holmes's methods knows, the smallest detail often unravels the grandest deceptions. What begins as a curious anecdote swiftly spirals into a web of hidden identities, long-buried secrets, and a plot that threatens far more than one woman's peace of mind. It is a classic detective adventure in the making, full of the twists and intellectual intrigue that have made these stories timeless. So lean in and listen closely, for we are about to follow the world's greatest detective down a path where nothing is as it seems, and where the truth is waiting, just beyond the next fog-draped corner. Mrs. Winthrop, for that was her name, did not merely enter the room. She seemed to unravel into it, a whirlwind of damp wool and palpable dread. She was a woman of clear means, her attire finely made though now disheveled from the weather and her obvious distress. But she spoke with the frantic energy of someone whose entire world had just been upended. Watson immediately offered her his chair by the fire, his medical instincts kicking in as he assessed her pale complexion and trembling hands. Holmes, however, remained by the window, a silhouette against the foggy pane, observing her with that detached, all-seeing intensity that could feel so unnerving to a new client. She clutched a handkerchief, not dabbing at tears, but twisting it into a tight, tortured knot. Her story poured out in a desperate, jumbled torrent. She was not an aristocrat by birth, but the widow of a highly successful importer, left with a comfortable life and a small collection of truly exceptional artifacts. And it was the crown jewel of this collection that was now gone. The item was a music box, she explained, but not just any music box. It was a unique piece, commissioned by her late husband from a master craftsman in Switzerland. Its value was not merely sentimental, though that was immense. Its case was inlaid with mother-of-pearl and rare tropical woods, and its mechanism was said to be one of a kind, capable of playing a specific, forgotten folk melody that had been his favorite. She kept it in her drawing room, a treasured reminder of him. But this morning it was simply gone. The glass-fronted cabinet where it resided was locked, yet the key still hung on its hook nearby. Nothing else was disturbed. No windows were forced. There was no sign of a struggle. The only thing out of place was an object left, sitting squarely in the center of the empty shelf, where the music box had been. It was a small figurine, carved from a single piece of jet black obsidian. The craftsmanship was exquisite, depicting a cat seated in a proud, alert posture. Its surface was polished to a high gloss, and it felt oddly heavy for its size. But its most striking, its most chilling feature was its face. The carver had given it only one eye, a single, piercing chip of green jade set deep into the stone socket on the right side. The left side of its face was smooth, unmarked stone, a blank void where its other eye should have been. This singular, unnerving artifact was the soul calling card of the thief. Mrs. Winthrop had never seen it before. It held no meaning for her, and that, she confessed, was what truly terrified her. A common thief she could understand, but this felt different. This felt personal. This felt like a message, and she was desperately afraid she was the only one who couldn't read it. The scene at Mrs. Winthrop's Mayfair residence was a study in contradiction. A home of elegant, ordered tranquility that had been violated by an act of near magical impossibility. While the good lady hovered anxiously in the doorway, wringing her hands, Holmes became a whirlwind of quiet, focused energy, his magnifying glass appearing in his hand as if by its own volition. He moved not like a man searching for clues, but like one who already knew precisely where they would be, his attention homing in on the small, locked cabinet with the intensity of a bloodhound catching a scent. Watson, ever the diligent chronicler, observed his friend's method, noting how Holmes first ignored the cabinet entirely to instead circle the room, his gaze sweeping over the floor, the walls, and the furniture with an unnerving thoroughness. He finally knelt before the glass doors of the display case, his nose mere inches from the polished wood. "You see, Watson, but you do not observe," he murmured, a phrase the doctor had heard countless times, yet one that never failed to spark his curiosity. The dust here tells a story far more eloquent than our client's fearful narrative. He pointed with a long, thin finger. The shelf upon which the music box had rested was coated in a fine, even layer of dust, a fact Mrs. Winthrop had admitted to with some embarrassment regarding her housekeeping. Yet, within the rectangular space where the box had stood, the wood was clean and bright. The thief did not simply lift the box away, Holmes deduced. He placed a template over it first, perhaps a sheet of stiff paper or a cloth, and then carefully dusted around it. He was not merely stealing. He was performing a meticulous operation, ensuring he left no trace of his activity on the shelf itself. His attention then shifted to the simple brass lock on the cabinet door. He produced a lens from his pocket and examined it minutely. "No scratches, no tool marks, no distortion of the metal," he announced. This was not picked. It was opened with its own key. He gestured to the small hook on the wall nearby where the key still dangled. "A duplicate, then. The lock is a common type. A copy would be trivial to procure for anyone with a moment's access to the original." Watson, following his friend's lead, crossed to the room's single large window, examining the latch. "It's locked from the inside, Holmes. No sign of forced entry." "Indeed," Holmes replied, a flicker of amusement in his keen eyes. "And observe the sill." Watson leaned in. The interior windowsill was, like everything else in the fastidious widow's home, spotlessly clean. But on the very outer edge, where the wood met the frame, Holmes's sensitive finger brushed against a nearly invisible substance, a few granules of a dark, coarse soil, distinctly out of place on a Mayfair windowsill. "Our intruder did not come through the window," Holmes stated. "But he certainly used it. This is not London clay. This is the sort of soil one finds in a specific part of Hampstead Heath. rich with decomposed granite. Finally, his focus returned to the obsidian cat, which remained precisely where Mrs. Winthrop had said they'd found it. He did not touch it immediately, instead circling the cabinet to view it from every angle. "Note its placement," he instructed Watson. "It is not carelessly dropped. It is centered with exacting precision on the clean space left by the music box. It is a replacement, an object of equal, if darker, value has been swapped for the one taken." Only then did he carefully lift the figurine, weighing it in his palm. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. This is no mere token, it is a signature, and the choice of a one-eyed cat, it is not a random deformity. In the language of symbols, a single eye often denotes a singular focus, a unique perspective, or a watchful guardian. Our thief is telling us he sees what others cannot." He turned to Mrs. Winthrop, his expression unreadable. "The question is not how he entered, madame. The question is why he left this behind. And for that, we must look not to your locks, but to your past." Holmes's deduction about the symbol being a signature was more than mere intuition. It was a direct line into the mind of their adversary. The one-eyed cat is not an arbitrary image plucked from the air. Throughout history and across cultures, the motif of a single eye carries immense weight. In ancient Egypt, the Eye of Horus was a powerful symbol of protection, royal power, and good health. Yet it was also born from a story of violence, betrayal, and restitution after the god Osiris was slain by his brother Set. Horus lost his eye in the ensuing battle, and its subsequent restoration came to represent making whole what was broken, a process of healing and payment. Could our thief see himself as a restorer of balance, taking an object as payment for some perceived wrong? This concept of watchfulness extends further. The single, all-seeing eye appears on the reverse of the American dollar bill, watching over the fortunes of a nation, and has been adopted by various secret societies to denote hidden knowledge and surveillance. A one-eyed creature, therefore, is an entity that sees the world differently, its perspective narrowed to a laser focus, missing the broader view but gaining an intense, piercing insight into a single truth. For a criminal, adopting such a symbol is a declaration of intent. It says, "I see what you have hidden. I understand what others have missed." But the cat itself adds another profound layer of meaning. Felines are universally emblematic of stealth, independence, and mystery. They are creatures of the night, moving with a silence that can be either comforting or deeply alarming. In European folklore, a black cat is a classic omen, either of good fortune or impending doom, a familiar to witches or a clever trickster in its own right. To combine this with the singularity of one eye creates a symbol of unique and ominous purpose. This was no lucky charm left behind. It was a calculated message. It whispered of a specific history, a shared secret between the thief and Mrs. Winthrop that she, for all her terror, seemed unable to recall. Holmes understood that to find the music box, they would not be tracking a mere burglar. They would be hunting a ghost from the past, one who moved with a cat's quiet grace and saw the world with a terrifying, singular vision. The household staff of a woman like Mrs. Winthrop was a world unto itself, a small ecosystem of hierarchy and routine, and it was into this world that Holmes and Watson now stepped. The interviews were conducted in the housekeeper's sitting room, a small, tidy space that smelled of beeswax and fresh linen, a stark contrast to the tension that now filled it. Holmes did not sit behind a desk or adopt an official posture. Instead, he wandered the room, his hands clasped behind his back, appearing to examine a sampler on the wall or a porcelain figurine on the mantel. all while his true attention remained fixed on the person answering his deceptively simple questions. First was the butler, a man named Henderson, whose bearing was so impeccably correct it seemed to be a part of his uniform. He answered each query with a measured, almost rehearsed precision. He confirmed the household schedule, the locking of the doors, and stated he had heard nothing unusual in the night. His demeanor was one of unshakable professionalism, yet Holmes noted the man's left thumb incessantly rubbing against the side of his forefinger, a tiny, repetitive motion of controlled anxiety. When Holmes casually mentioned the type of soil found on the windowsill, Henderson's eyes flickered, just for an instant, toward the garden door at the rear of the house, a minuscule tell that Watson would have missed entirely. The housemaid, a young woman named Eliza, was a bundle of raw nerves. Her hands trembled as she clutched her apron, and her answers came in rushed, breathless bursts. She insisted she had seen and heard nothing, her gaze darting toward the housekeeper for reassurance. Yet when Watson, in his kindlier tone, asked if she'd noticed any strange callers or deliveries in recent days, she mentioned a man coming to the tradesman's entrance 2 days prior. A messenger he said he was, she stammered, asking for directions, but his clothes were too fine for a messenger, and he had a scar right here, she said, tracing a line from her temple to her jaw. He put me in mind of a soldier. This was a crack in the facade, a detail of immense value, and Holmes stored it away without a change in expression. The most revealing interview, however, was with the cook, Mrs. Beecham, a formidable woman with flour on her sleeves and a no-nonsense glint in her eye. She was annoyed by the disruption to her kitchen's rhythm and had little patience for what she called fuss and bother. Her story directly contradicted the butler's on a key point: the locking of the garden door. Henderson had stated it was bolted every night without fail. Mrs. Beecham, however, recalled hearing it close well after midnight, a solid, definitive thud that had echoed through the silent servants' quarters. "I sleep light, and that door sticks something fierce in the damp," she stated flatly. Someone was out, or someone was in. The look she shot toward the hallway where Henderson had retreated was not one of fear, but of deep suspicion. Holmes did not confront the contradiction immediately. Instead, he allowed the tension of these conflicting accounts to simmer. He saw not a conspiracy among the staff, but a web of individual secrets and private fears. The butler's controlled anxiety suggested he was protecting something. Perhaps a minor dereliction of duty, he feared, would cost him his position. The maid's terror seemed more general, the fear of a young woman caught in events far beyond her understanding. And the cook's blunt accusation pointed toward a fracture in the household's trusted order. Each person, in their own way, was hiding a piece of the puzzle, not out of malice, but out of an instinct for self-preservation. For Sherlock Holmes, these human failings were more illuminating than any forced lock or misplaced footprint. The truth was not just in what they said, but in the nervous glance, the fidgeting hand, and the unspoken accusation hanging heavy in the air between them. A disgruntled former employee is, of course, the first place any investigation turns, and in this case, the household provided a perfect candidate, Mrs. Winthrop, upon gentle prodding from Holmes, reluctantly recalled a young footman named Edward Miller, who had been let go just 3 months prior. The reason for his dismissal was a series of small, valuable items gone missing: a silver snuff box, a pair of cufflinks, nothing of the music box's magnitude, but a pattern of petty theft nonetheless. Miller had protested his innocence vehemently, even threatening the butler, Henderson, who had been the one to uncover the discrepancies. He had stormed out with a vow that the household would regret its lack of faith. It was a motive served on a silver platter. A man with a grudge, a known light-fingered tendency, and an intimate knowledge of the home's layout and routines. The clues seemed to coalesce around him with almost convenient speed. Holmes's inquiries in the local public houses revealed that Miller had been drinking heavily of late and was deeply in debt to a rather unsavory bookmaker. The need for a large, quick sum of money was a powerful engine for crime. Furthermore, the housemaid Eliza, when questioned again separately, grew even more distressed and admitted that the messenger with the scar she had seen had been asking specifically for directions to a street where Miller was known to lodge. The final, seemingly damning piece of evidence was presented by a constable from the local precinct, who, upon hearing of the investigation, recalled having to move Miller along just 2 nights ago for being drunk and disorderly on a corner less than a block from Mrs. Winthrop's home. He was literally lurking nearby. The case, to the eyes of the law, was all but closed. A constable was dispatched to bring Miller in for questioning. Watson felt a familiar sense of satisfaction, the kind that comes when a diagnosis seems clear and the treatment straightforward. He remarked to Holmes on the neatness of it all, the resentful employee returning to take an item of great value, leaving a grotesque token as a final insult to the woman who had cast him out. It was a narrative that made perfect, logical sense, but Holmes was not nodding in agreement. Instead, he wore that faint, elusive smile that Watson had come to recognize as the precursor to overturning every assumption in the room. "It is indeed neat, Watson," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the obsidian cat figurine as he turned it over in his hand. "Excessively so. It fits together like the pieces of a child's puzzle. But a real conspiracy, a true act of calculated vengeance, is never this tidy. It is messy, human, and fraught with error. This feels like a performance." His reasoning was cold, clear logic applied to the heat of apparent fact. "Consider the timeline," he began. "A man dismissed for petty theft, who knows the house intimately, returns for a grand score. Would he bother with the intricate pantomime of dusting around the object? Would he go to the trouble of procuring a duplicate key for a lock he could likely pick with a hairpin? And most importantly," Holmes said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "would this footman, a man of simple means and simpler tastes, have access to or any interest in an object of this nature?" He held up the jet black cat. "This is no mere token. This is a piece of exquisite, expensive artistry. Its symbolism is specific, intellectual, almost academic. It is the calling card of someone with a point to prove, not a debt to pay. We are not looking for a common thief, Watson. We are being led to one. Every clue that points to Miller feels planted." The angry words, the citing by the constable, even the testimony of the maid, it has the flavor of a stage play, designed for an audience of one, us. The first suspect was a red herring, a distraction laid with clever precision to send the investigation down a blind alley, while the true architect of the theft remained, watching from the shadows with his one good eye. Yet a master of deduction does not simply accept the most apparent path. Holmes saw not a clear trail of guilt, but a series of breadcrumbs left a little too deliberately, as if someone were walking backwards to create a false path in the snow. "The case against Miller is a facade, Watson, constructed with a cunning that the man himself likely does not possess," he stated, his voice calm and analytical, amidst the rising certainty of everyone else in the room. "Let us examine the architecture of this frame-up, for that is what it is." He began to dissect the evidence with the precision of a surgeon, laying each piece on an imaginary operating table for inspection. First, the motive, he began. A man dismissed for pilfering small, easily concealed items, snuff boxes and cufflinks, suddenly graduates to a far more complex and risky operation. He bypasses a dozen other valuable objects in the same cabinet to take one specific, sentimental item. An act that requires not greed, but purpose. Furthermore, he then supposedly leaves behind an object of arguably greater material value and certain artistic merit. This is not the behavior of a thief in need of money. It is the behavior of a playwright arranging his props. He then turned to the method, the dust. A common footman, even a dishonest one, is a creature of routine and physical labor. His world is one of polishing silver and scrubbing floors. Would such a man, in the tense moments of a burglary, pause to perform the meticulous, time-consuming task of laying a template and carefully dusting around the object he intends to steal? It is an act of fastidious, almost obsessive cleanliness, utterly at odds with the frantic need of a desperate man. It speaks of a cool, unhurried mind, not a nervous criminal. And the key, Holmes continued, his eyes gleaming. Henderson stated the key never left its hook. Miller was dismissed 3 months ago. Are we to believe he had the foresight to have a duplicate made for a simple cabinet lock during his employment, on the off chance he would be fired, and later wished to steal a single music box? The logic collapses under its own weight. A duplicate key suggests recent access, not past opportunity. Finally, he addressed the most human element, the maid's testimony. Eliza is terrified. She is also highly impressionable. She described a messenger with a scar, a detail so theatrical it belongs in A Penny Dreadful. And critically, she only recalled this detail after being questioned a second time, after the atmosphere in the house had become charged with suspicion, and the name Edward Miller had already been introduced. Her memory was not being jogged, it was being coached, her fear shaping a vague recollection into a specific accusation that fit the narrative being woven around her. Holmes concluded his quiet demolition by turning his gaze to the obsidian cat. This is the centerpiece of the entire misdirection. It is the one piece of evidence that cannot point to Miller, for he could never have afforded its commission or understood its symbolism. Its presence proves the existence of another player, a puppeteer who is manipulating Miller's history, the staff's fears, and even our own investigation. We have been presented with a solution. A true detective's work begins by questioning why that particular solution was so eager to be found. But the most telling detail, the one that shifted the entire axis of the investigation, was something so small and seemingly insignificant that it had escaped everyone's notice, everyone, of course, except for Sherlock Holmes. After his meticulous examination of the cabinet and the windowsill, his attention had drifted to the periphery of the room, to the heavy velvet drapes that framed the window where the foreign soil had been found. It was there, caught on a rough thread near the hem of the curtain, that his keen eye spotted it. A single fine hair, it was not human. It was too short and too coarse. And it was certainly not from the obsidian figurine, which was carved from cold, unyielding stone. Using the tweezers from his pocket kit and a fresh glass slide, Holmes carefully extracted the evidence and held it up to the grey London light filtering through the window. Watson leaned in, his medical training kicking in. An animal hair, he ventured. From a dog, perhaps. The widow may have a pet. Holmes's response was a quiet, negative hum. Observe the coloration, Watson. A base of deep, smoky grey, but tipped with a distinctive, almost russet orange. Note the thickness and the slight wave to it. This is not the undercoat of a domestic dog. This is something else entirely. He moved to the fireplace, where the remnants of the morning's fire still smouldered, and with a deliberate motion, he held the hair close to the heat. Watson expected it to curl and burn, but instead a faint, unmistakable odor began to emanate from it, a musky, feral scent, wild and entirely out of place in the perfumed drawing room of a Mayfair widow. The common fox, Holmes declared, his voice low with certainty. Vulpes, vulpes, this single hair is from a red fox, and it was caught on this drape not by chance, but because the animal itself was in this room, and recently. The implication was staggering. A wild fox, inside a locked London townhouse, in the heart of the city. It was an impossibility that pointed to a breathtaking audacity in their thief. This was no mere man with a duplicate key. This was a performer, a master of stagecraft, who employed unconventional assistants. The soil sample from the windowsill now took on a brilliant new significance. Holmes had already identified it as being from Hampstead Heath, a vast wooded area on the outskirts of London, known for its rugged terrain, and notably its healthy population of urban foxes. The two clues were no longer separate. They were intimately connected. The thief had not merely passed through the heath, he had brought a piece of it with him, quite literally underfoot, and he had not come alone. The presence of the fox hair suggested a creature used to human contact, perhaps even trained. It presented an image of the crime that was both bizarre and brilliant. A figure, shrouded in the fog of night, entering the garden with a fox on a lead, using the animal's natural stealth and silence as the ultimate accomplice. The fox could have been directed to enter through a small, overlooked opening, a delivery hatch, a ventilation grate that a human would never consider, and then create a distraction or even retrieve the key itself. This whisker of evidence, this tiny russet-tipped hair, did not just provide a new clue. It completely redefined the profile of their quarry, revealing a criminal mind of extraordinary ingenuity and theatrical flair. Yet with this startling new evidence came a profound question. Where in all of London does one begin to hunt for a thief who employs a fox as his accomplice? For Sherlock Holmes, the answer was not found in the pristine, ordered world of Mayfair, but in the vibrant, chaotic underbelly of the city, where information was a currency more valuable than gold. The journey he and Watson now undertook was a descent into a different London entirely, leaving behind the gaslit propriety of the West End for the fog-drenched, lantern-lit labyrinth of the East End. This was a place where the rules of polite society did not apply, and where a man's survival often depended on what he knew and who he was willing to tell. Their destination was not a formal institution or a constabulary office, but a specific notorious public house known as the Rusty Nail, nestled in the shadow of the docks. To the uninitiated, it was simply a place for sailors to spend their wages, but to those who understood its true nature, it was a clearinghouse for the city's most obscure and specialized information. It was here that the strange and the unbelievable were often traded as fact. Holmes moved through the crowded, smoke-filled room with an air of complete belonging, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The furtive exchanges in shadowy corners, the specific hand gestures that signaled a deal being struck, the particular dialects of the criminal fraternity that filled the air. Watson, ever the steadfast companion, stayed close, his military bearing causing more than one patron to eye him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Holmes did not begin by asking about a music box or a thief. Instead, he approached the grizzled, one-armed publican who presided over the chaos like a weary captain on a storm-tossed ship. He ordered 2 pints of the house ale, and in a casual tone that belied his intense purpose, began to speak not of crime, but of folklore. He inquired about local legends, old tales passed down through the dockworkers and river men. He spoke of cunning animals, of spirits that took the form of beasts, and of modern myths of a ghost that could command the creatures of the city. This was the key to unlocking the East End's secrets. One did not demand answers, one traded in stories. And the stories came slowly at first, then in a richer flow. An old lace seller, her fingers still moving as if weaving patterns in the air, recalled a tale her own grandmother had told of a Pied Piper of the Vermin, a figure from the last century who was said to clear the city's streets of pests, not with a flute, but with a trained ferret. A barrel-chested stevedore, his arms thick with tattoos of serpents and ships, mentioned in a low rumble that he'd heard a new story circulating only in the last few months, a whisper of a man who could be seen walking the marshes of Wapping at dusk, a red fox trotting obediently at his heel like a common hound. The man, they said, wore a heavy cloak and kept his face hidden, but he was known by a name that made the hairs on Watson's neck stand on end. They called him the Keeper of the Single Eye. This was the breakthrough. The symbol was not just a signature, it was a title, an identity that was being forged in the crucible of the city's underworld. The one-eyed cat was his emblem, but his true talent, his emerging legend, was his unnatural command over animals. He was not merely a thief, he was a showman building a reputation, using his incredible feats to create a mythos that would make him seem untouchable. The theft of the music box was not his end game. It was an audition, a spectacular piece of theatre designed to announce his arrival to a very specific audience, hidden within the shadowy economy of London. Holmes now understood they were not chasing a criminal. They were chasing a legend in the making. And every whispered story in that smoky pub was another brushstroke in the portrait of a man who was quickly becoming more myth than man. The whispered name, the Keeper of the Single Eye, was a start, but a myth needs an address. The legends of the East End pointed toward the river, to the decaying wharves and abandoned warehouses that festered along the Thames like old wounds. It was in this domain of rotting wood and rusted iron that Holmes sought a more concrete lead, and for that he needed a specific kind of guide. His inquiries, dropped like coins into the murky waters of the underworld, eventually bought him a name, Sealer's Rudge. A mudlarker by trade, Rudge was a creature of the riverbanks, scouring the toxic silt for lost coins or scrap metal to sell. More importantly, he was known as the eyes and ears of the Wapping docks, a man who saw everything because he was himself considered beneath notice. The meeting was set for a place as unwelcoming as the man himself, a derelict boathouse, its roof half collapsed, and the air thick with the stench of stagnant water and decay. Watson felt a familiar tension coiling in his shoulders, his hand instinctively drifting toward the revolver in his pocket. This was not the controlled environment of a Baker Street interview. This was the edge of the world, where the rules were written in shadows. They found Rudge huddled over a tiny, guttering fire built in an old metal pail. His form shrouded in a stained greatcoat, several sizes too large. He didn't look up as they approached, his entire being focused on coaxing heat from the feeble flame. Holmes did not offer pleasantries. He placed a gold sovereign on a nearby crate, the coin gleaming in the firelight like a malevolent eye. Rudge's gaze flicked to it, then away, but the hunger in that glance was unmistakable. "I was told you know the comings and goings on this stretch of the river," Holmes began, his voice low and even. "I'm looking for a man who doesn't wish to be found." "He walks with a fox." Rudge let out a phlegmy laugh that turned into a cough. "Lots of strange folk down by the water, governor, madmen talking to girls." "Don't know about no foxes." His eyes slid back to the sovereign. Holmes placed a second coin next to the first. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip of water and the distant cry of a barge. The mudlarker's reluctance was a palpable thing, a wall built from fear. He was not just holding out for more money, he was genuinely afraid of what he knew. "He ain't a man to be trifled with," Rudge muttered, finally looking up, his face a road map of grime and hardship. seen things I can't explain. Animals doing his bidding, like he's got 'em under a spell. They say he can see right through you with that one eye of his. Watson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. The informant had just confirmed their thief's most distinctive feature, a single eye. This was no longer just a name from a story. It was a physical description. Holmes's expression remained impassive, but Watson saw the keen light of discovery in his eyes. "A location, Mr. Rudge. That is all I require." The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked over his shoulder into the oppressive darkness of the boathouse, as if expecting the very subject of their conversation to be standing there. "There's an old chandler's shop," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Past the ruined granary where the river bends sharp. Got a green door half off its hinges. He uses the cellar, goes in after full dark, never leaves a light." His grimy hand shot out and snatched the 2 sovereigns from the crate, stuffing them into a pocket with frantic speed. "That's all I know. We never had this talk. You never heard the name from me." He scrambled to his feet, his earlier lethargy replaced by a sudden, desperate energy to be gone from that place and from their company. He vanished into the shadows of the boathouse, the sound of his retreating footsteps swallowed by the echoing space. He had left them with more than just an address. He had handed them a key wrapped in a warning. The fear in his voice was a more valuable clue than the directions themselves, confirming they were not just on the trail of a clever thief, but of someone who inspired a deep and primal terror in the hearts of those who knew of him. The green door awaited, a threshold to a deeper level of the mystery. And whatever lay behind it was clearly something the world was not meant to see. The green door, just as Silas Rudge had described, hung precariously from a single rusted hinge, a sliver of darkness beckoning from within the derelict chandler's shop. The air down by the bend in the river was thick with the smell of rotting fish and damp decay. A far cry from the perfumed drawing room where this all began. Pushing it open, the groan of protesting wood seemed to scream their arrival to the empty wharf. But Holmes paid it no mind, his entire being focused on the narrow, slick stone steps that descended into the cellar below. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the beam of the bull's-eye lantern Watson had prudently brought along. What they discovered in that subterranean space was not a simple criminal's hideout. It was a gallery of obsession, and it transformed a single theft into something far more sinister. The beam of light swept across a scene of meticulous chaos. Pinned to the damp brick walls were not maps or plans, but a sprawling collection of newspaper clippings, society pages torn from magazines, and detailed, hand-drawn sketches. Each one featured an object of art or antiquity. A jeweled pendant worn by a countess at the opera, a unique Saxon dagger on display at a private museum, a first folio Shakespeare owned by a reclusive industrialist. And beside each image, written in a precise, elegant script, was a name, a date, and a value. This was no random wish list. It was a curated catalogue of targets, a systematic survey of London's most prized portable treasures. Mrs. Winthrop's music box was there, its mother-of-pearl inlay captured in a detailed sketch, its value noted not in pounds, but in a single cryptic word: leverage. But the most chilling element, the thread that connected every clipping and every sketch, was the symbol drawn in the corner of each page, a small, unmistakable silhouette of a one-eyed cat. This was not a random signature. It was a brand. The keeper of the single eye was not a lone wolf thief indulging a peculiar hobby. He was a procurer, a specialist employed by a larger, far more powerful organization to acquire very specific items. The operation's sophistication was staggering. The notes beside each object didn't just list its worth. They detailed the patterns of the household staff, the vulnerabilities in the estate's security, the sentimental value to the owner, and even potential blackmail opportunities related to the item's history. The music box, for instance, was noted not for its monetary value, but because its unique melody was a code, a sequence of notes that corresponded to a hidden safe combination belonging to Mrs. Winthrop's late husband, a safe whose existence she herself was likely unaware of. This was the larger scheme. The thefts themselves were merely the final visible step in a long, invisible process of intelligence gathering and psychological profiling. The one-eyed cat was more than an identifier. It was a statement of method. It told its recipients that the thief saw what others missed. The hidden meaning, the secret weakness, the single point of failure that could bring an entire fortune tumbling down. The items were being acquired for a purpose. Some for a ruthless collector who desired the impossible, others to be used as collateral in a high-stakes game of corporate or political blackmail, and some, like the music box, to unlock even greater treasures. The keeper was the tip of a very deep and very dark iceberg, an artist whose unconventional methods made him the perfect instrument for a clientele that operated from the shadows, far from the messy business of actual crime. He provided them with deniability and an unparalleled success rate, all wrapped in a legend that made him seem less like a man and more like a supernatural force, a useful myth for those who pulled his strings. Holmes's focus shifted from the walls of that damp cellar, from the sprawling catalogue of treasures, and returned with laser-like intensity to the one object that had started it all, Mrs. Winthrop's music box. It sat there on the page of his notebook, sketched amidst the clippings, its value reduced to that single, chilling word, leverage. And in that moment, the entire nature of the case inverted itself. He saw with absolute clarity what had been hiding in plain sight all along. The music box was not the prize. It had never been the prize. It was merely the delivery mechanism, the ornate, sentimental shell for a far more valuable core. A master criminal who could train a fox to be his accomplice, and who meticulously researched the vulnerabilities of London's elite, would not risk exposure for a trinket, no matter how beautifully crafted. He was hunting bigger game. The item itself is a red herring of the most exquisite design. Holmes stated, his voice low and urgent as he and Watson retreated from the chandler's shop into the concealing fog. Consider the facts we now possess. The thief's notes do not speak of the box's monetary or artistic worth. They speak of leverage, and leverage implies power over a person, not possession of an object. Therefore, the true value of the music box lies not in what it is, but in what it contains or what it can access. His mind raced through the possibilities. The most obvious was a hidden compartment. A craftsman of the box's reputed skill could easily have engineered a false bottom or a secret panel, a space to conceal documents, a jewel, or a key to something vastly more significant. But Holmes's intuition pushed him toward a more abstract, and therefore more likely, truth. He recalled Mrs. Winthrop's description of the device, its unique mechanism, its one-of-a-kind melody. You said it played a specific, forgotten folk melody, a favorite of her late husband's, he reminded Watson. What if that melody is itself the key? A sequence of notes could be a code, a cipher that unlocks a safe, a strongbox, or even a piece of encrypted correspondence. The box is not the treasure, it is the combination. This line of thought exploded into a web of devastating implications. Mr. Winthrop had been a highly successful importer, a man who moved goods and capital across international borders. Such a business often operated in grey areas, dealing with complex customs regulations and competing interests. It was entirely plausible, even probable, that he had engaged in practices he wished to keep hidden from the authorities, his business partners, or even his own wife. A secret safe, its location unknown to Mrs. Winthrop, containing ledgers of off-the-books transactions, blackmail material on powerful figures, or a fortune in untraceable assets, this was a treasure worth a master thief's attention. The music box, a gift of love sitting openly in the drawing room, was the perfect hiding place for the means to access it. Its sentimental value guaranteed its safety. No one would ever think to destroy it or look beyond its charming exterior. The thief, the keeper of the single eye, hadn't stolen a music box. He had stolen the key to a dead man's secrets, and in doing so he had not just robbed a widow. He had positioned himself to unleash a scandal that could topple fortunes and reputations across London. The real target had never been in the room with them. It was hidden somewhere else entirely, waiting for the right song to open it. The sense of triumph from their discovery in the chandler's shop was chillingly short-lived. Returning to the sanctuary of Baker Street, the familiar clutter of chemical apparatus, unanswered correspondence, and beloved books should have felt like a protective cloak. Watson was already at his desk, eager to transcribe the evening's remarkable findings, while Holmes stood before the fireplace, his mind undoubtedly weaving the new threads of the keeper's grand design into a coherent tapestry. The fire crackled with a comforting normality, a stark contrast to the damp malevolence of the riverfront. It was in this moment of quiet reflection that Mrs. Hudson entered, her usual composed demeanor replaced by a palpable unease. In her hands she held a small, flat package wrapped in plain brown paper, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. "It was just left on the front step, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice hushed. "No bell was rung. I only found it because I was drawing the curtains for the night." She placed the parcel on the table as if it were a live bomb and retreated quickly, closing the door behind her. The package bore no address, no postmark, no identifying marks whatsoever. Its anonymity was itself a threat. Holmes approached it not with fear, but with the focused curiosity of a scientist presented with a fascinating new specimen. Using a letter opener, he carefully slit the paper, revealing not an explosive device, but an object that sent a colder dread through the room than any infernal machine could have. Inside, nestled on a bed of Excelsior packing, was another figurine of a one-eyed cat. But this one was different. Where the first was polished obsidian, a work of art, this was crudely fashioned from common dark clay, as if hastily shaped by an impatient hand. Its single eye was not a precious gem, but a mere daub of cheap, flaking green paint. The message was not in its craftsmanship, but in its very existence. It was a mockery, a cheap imitation meant to degrade and intimidate, and pinned to its crude back was a small, folded slip of paper. Holmes unfolded it with tweezers, holding it to the light. The message, scrawled in the same precise script they had seen in the cellar, contained only 7 words: "Cease your pursuit. Even walls have ears." The silence in the room became a physical presence. The warning was lethally clear. Their visit to the chandler's shop had not gone unnoticed. They had been observed, their movements tracked, their investigation laid bare. The keeper knew who they were, where they lived, and precisely what they had discovered. The phrase, "even walls have ears," was a masterstroke of psychological terror. It implied that their every word within the supposed safety of their own home could be overheard, that their sanctuary was violated. The crude clay cut was a calculated insult, a way of saying their brilliant deductions were child's play to him, their efforts worthy only of this shoddy, contemptuous replica. He was not just a thief. He was a puppeteer who enjoyed letting his puppets see the strings. only to remind them how completely they were bound by them. The game had escalated from a contest of wits to a direct and personal confrontation. And the first move had been made not on the foggy docks, but on their very own doorstep. The arrival of that chilling package seemed to suck all the warmth from the room, leaving a void filled only with the ticking of the clock and the low crackle of the fire. Watson stared at the crude clay cat, its single painted eye seeming to mock them from the table. He felt a familiar frustration begin to boil within him, a soldier's response to a direct threat. While Holmes examined the note with detached fascination, Watson's mind, trained in the practicalities of medicine and warfare, began to assemble its own, more straightforward version of events. "Holmes," he began, his voice firm with a conviction born of common sense, "this changes nothing. In fact, it confirms my earlier suspicions. We are dealing with a man, not a spectre, and a dangerously arrogant one at that." He rose and began to pace before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. "Consider the psychological profile. We have an individual, likely this former footman Miller or someone connected to him, who feels profoundly wronged by Mrs. Winthrop. The theft of the music box was an act of pure spite, a way to take the one object most cherished by the widow. The first figurine, the obsidian one, was a taunt, a grandiose gesture to make himself seem more powerful and mysterious than he truly is." He turned, his expression earnest. But now, having learned that Sherlock Holmes is on his trail, his bravado has curdled into panic. This clay imitation is the work of a frightened man, hastily crafted and delivered in a desperate attempt to scare us off. It is the criminal equivalent of a cornered animal baring its teeth. The message about walls having ears is pure bluster, a cheap theatric meant to unnerve us because he knows his initial plan has failed. He overplayed his hand with the first figurine, and now he is trying to cover his tracks with intimidation. Watson's theory was built on a foundation of human emotion, anger, fear, pride, all things he understood intimately from his time on the battlefield and in the surgery. It was a narrative of a simple crime of passion that had spiraled out of the criminal's control. He even had a medical analogy ready. It is like diagnosing a patient who presents with a series of dramatic, unrelated symptoms, he explained. A less experienced physician might be distracted by the fever and the rash, treating each individually. But the master diagnostician looks for the single underlying infection causing it all. This business with the fox hair, the different soils, the catalogue in the cellar, these are the fever and the rash. They are fascinating symptoms, but they are not the disease. The disease is a bitter, vengeful heart. We should be focusing our efforts on Miller's known associates and his financial records, not chasing fairy tales about animal tamers on the docks. Watson's theory was perfectly logical, internally consistent, and built upon a rational observation of human nature. It was also, as Holmes would gently reveal, completely wrong. It was a testament to their unique partnership. Watson provided the essential ballast of conventional wisdom, the view of the world as it appeared to most reasonable men. This perspective was invaluable, for it often illuminated the path that the criminal wanted them to take. In doing so, Watson's solid, dependable reasoning inadvertently highlighted the sheer brilliance of Holmes's methods, which operated on a level that transcended conventional logic to perceive the intricate architecture of a plot hidden in the shadows of the obvious. Holmes listened to Watson's earnest explanation with that familiar, patient expression, the one that conveyed both deep respect for his friend's intellect and a quiet certainty that the path being suggested led directly into a cleverly laid trap. He did not interrupt, allowing Watson to fully articulate his theory, for he understood that the process of speaking it often allowed the speaker himself to hear its flaws. When Watson finished, Holmes leaned forward, steepling his fingers beneath his chin, his gaze fixed on the crude clay cat, as if it were the most fascinating subject in the world. "Your reasoning, my dear Watson, is a model of lucidity and common sense," he began, his voice devoid of any condescension. "It is precisely the conclusion any practical man would reach, and it is therefore the very conclusion our adversary wishes us to reach. You have constructed a solid, believable edifice, but I fear it is built upon a foundation of assumptions that the evidence itself does not support." He gestured toward the clay figurine. "You see this as the product of a panicked man, a hasty imitation meant to intimidate. I see it as the second act of a meticulously planned play. The first figurine was crafted from obsidian, a material both valuable and difficult to work with, requiring immense skill and patience. This one is common clay, easily shaped and quick to dry. The contrast is not a sign of deteriorating competence. It is a deliberate artistic choice. The first was left as a signature of pride and capability. This one has been delivered as a message of contempt. He is not frightened of us. He is insulting us." Holmes then systematically dismantled the theory point by point, not to embarrass his friend, but to illustrate the precise mechanics of the deception. "You attribute this to Miller, the dismissed footman, a man motivated by simple spite and financial desperation. But consider the psychological profile required for each action. The theft itself was one of breathtaking audacity and cool-headed precision, entering our occupied home, performing a fastidious dusting ritual around the target, and leaving a valuable artifact in its place. These are not the actions of a man driven by hot-headed vengeance. These are the actions of a perfectionist, an artist who takes pride in the aesthetic of his crime. A spiteful man would have simply smashed the music box. He would not have replaced it with an object arguably more interesting. He turned his attention to the message. The phrase "even walls have ears" is not the bluster of a desperate criminal. It is a specific and chilling threat from a man who has demonstrated an uncanny ability to gather intelligence. He knew of Mrs. Winthrop's most cherished possession. He knew the patterns of her staff. He knew the composition of the soil on Hampstead Heath and the behaviors of an urban fox. Is it so difficult to believe he has methods of eavesdropping that we have not yet discovered? This is not a guess. It is a boast based on proven capability. Finally, Holmes addressed the heart of Watson's medical analogy. "You suggest we are treating the symptoms and not the disease. I would argue that we have, until now, been misdiagnosing the symptoms entirely. The fox hair, the soil, the cellar catalogue, these are not secondary rashes. They are the primary indicators of an entirely different malady. The disease is not simple vengeance. It is a sophisticated operation of acquisition and leverage, run by a mind that sees criminality as a form of high art. Miller may be a pawn in this game, perhaps even the messenger with the scar, used precisely because his history makes him the perfect scapegoat. To focus on him would be to chase the tail of the fox, while the animal itself slips back into its den. Our man is not hiding from us, Watson. He is in the open, confident in the brilliance of his misdirection, and he is waiting to see if we are clever enough to see through the glass he has so carefully laid down for us to follow. The shift in Holmes's focus was immediate and absolute. The crude clay cat was no longer a mere threat. It was a text to be read, a puzzle box waiting for its combination. He cleared a space on the chemical bench, ignoring the beakers and retorts, and laid the figurine on a clean sheet of white paper under the bright glow of his desk lamp. Watson watched, his earlier frustration replaced by a familiar sense of anticipation, as his friend's entire being became an instrument of pure observation. The detective's long, sensitive fingers turned the object over and over, not with haste, but with a deliberate, almost reverent slowness, examining every curve and imperfection of its surface. It was on the base that he found it. While the rest of the figurine was rough and uneven from its hasty construction, the bottom had been smoothed with surprising care. And into this flat surface, someone had inscribed a series of markings not with a tool, but likely with a sharp fingernail or a pin. They were not letters or numbers, but a sequence of simple geometric shapes: a circle, a vertical line, a triangle, another circle, a square, and then a final, longer horizontal line. They were faint, easy to dismiss as accidental scratches or the natural texture of the clay. But to Holmes, their deliberate spacing and consistent depth declared them a message. "Watson, the glass, if you please," he murmured, his voice tight with concentration. He took the proffered magnifier and studied the markings anew. "Our friend is indeed a man of many talents. He leaves a signature of contempt, yet cannot resist the intellectual vanity of encoding a challenge within it. He is playing a game, and this is his next move." The shapes themselves were inert, meaningless. Their power lay in their sequence and their potential for representation. Holmes rejected the initial, obvious idea that they were a simple substitution cipher for letters. The alphabet has 26 characters. This sequence had only 6 elements with repeats. "It is a code, not a cipher," Holmes announced. "The difference is critical. A cipher alters individual letters. A code replaces whole words or phrases with symbols. These shapes are not standing in for letters. They are representing complete concepts or instructions." He began to experiment, cross-referencing the shapes with known symbolic languages. A circle could represent eternity, a hole, or the sun. A line might be a horizon, a division, or the number 1. A triangle could signify danger, a pyramid, or change. But this felt too abstract, too open to interpretation for a criminal who had thus far demonstrated meticulous precision. His breakthrough came when he considered the context of delivery. The package was left on their doorstep, a warning to cease their pursuit. Therefore, the message was likely a threat, a boast, or a clue to his identity or next target. Holmes then made a lateral leap. "We are dealing with a man who communicates through animals and artifacts," he reasoned. "His language is not that of academia, but of the natural world and the criminal underworld. What if these shapes are not abstract symbols, but literal representations?" He fetched a London street atlas from his shelves, its pages worn from constant use. A circle could be a circus, a roundabout, or a plaza. A line is a straight road, an avenue. A triangle might be a corner plot, a place where 3 streets meet. A square is a garden square, a formal park. He began tracing his finger across the map of the city, looking for a location whose name or shape corresponded to the sequence. Circle, line, triangle, circle, square, line. Watson, following this new tack, had a different inspiration. "Holmes, what of the timing? This was delivered after full dark. Our adversary operates under the cover of night. What if these shapes correspond to the phases of the moon or the positions of stars?" But Holmes shook his head. "Too variable, Watson." His first message was left in a locked cabinet in broad daylight. His methods are grounded in the physical world. The code must be as tangible as the clay it is written on. He continued his search, his finger pausing at major intersections and landmarks, but nothing fit the sequence perfectly. The answer, when it came, was so brilliantly simple that Watson laughed aloud in admiration. Holmes's gaze had drifted from the map to the figurine itself, to the single daub of green paint that served as its eye. "The eye," he whispered, "the single eye, it is not just his name, it is his key." He looked back at the sequence: circle, line, triangle, circle, square, line. Forget the map, Watson. Think of a different kind of geography, the geography of a human face, viewed from the side. He picked up a pencil, and on a spare sheet of paper, he quickly sketched a profile of a head. The circle is the eye itself. The vertical line is the nose. The triangle could be the ear. Another circle might be the other eye, but it is on the wrong side for a profile. Unless... His voice trailed off as a new thought struck him. He turned the clay cat over again. Unless the sequence is not a description, but a set of instructions for finding the eye. Our keeper sees what others miss. He is telling us to look not at a place, but at a person, and to see the one feature that defines them. He reassessed the shapes with this new perspective. A circle, a line, a triangle, a circle, a square, a line. What if this is a directional code, a sequence of turns? Circle could mean go right or turn around. A line could mean go straight. A triangle with its points could mean head for a point or a corner. He was spiraling through possibilities, his mind moving faster than his voice could articulate. The true solution was elegant and devastating. Holmes suddenly looked up, his eyes wide with the shock of comprehension. It is not a map of London, Watson. It is a map of the crime itself. The circle is the music box, a round object. The line is the straight path the thief took to the cabinet. The triangle is the tri-cornered space where the figurine was placed. The second circle is the pupil of the cat's eye. The square is the four walls of the room. The final line is the line of sight, from the window to the door. He is not giving us a location. He is recreating his own crime scene, boasting that he understands every angle of it better than we ever could. He is signing his work not with a name, but with the architecture of his own brilliant arrogance. The code was a mirror, and in solving it, Holmes hadn't found the criminal's next move. He had been forced to admire the perfection of his last one. Yet even the most meticulously constructed alibi is only as strong as its weakest link. And for a mind like Sherlock Holmes's, a story that fits together too perfectly is itself a red flag. The suspect in question was not the dismissed footman, Edward Miller, but the impeccably professional butler, Henderson. Confronted with the growing evidence, the cook's testimony about the garden door, the soil sample from Hampstead Heath, and his own nervous demeanor, Henderson did not break. Instead, he presented a defense of such elegant simplicity that it seemed unassailable. He claimed that on the night of the theft, he was miles away from Mayfair, attending a private musical recital at the home of a former employer in Kensington. He had witnesses, the host, several fellow servants, and even a signed program from the event, which he produced from his pocket with a quiet, confident flourish. His timeline was precise. He had departed Mrs. Winthrop's residence at 7:30, taken an omnibus, arrived in Kensington by 8:30, and remained at the recital until well after midnight, only returning to Mayfair as the clock struck 1. The theft, as best as Holmes could determine from the household's routines, had occurred between the hours of 11 and 1. Henderson's presence in Kensington until after midnight placed him far from the scene with a seemingly watertight account. Holmes, of course, accepted the alibi with a polite nod and a request for the names of those who could corroborate his story. Outwardly, he appeared to be following a standard investigative procedure. Inwardly, he was dissecting every syllable of the butler's statement, searching for the single, almost invisible crack in the porcelain facade. An alibi supported by multiple upstanding witnesses and physical evidence is a formidable obstacle. To break it, one cannot attack it head-on. One must find the tiny detail that does not belong, the one thread that, when pulled, causes the entire tapestry to unravel. Holmes's genius lay in knowing that people lie, but circumstances and physical evidence rarely do. His line of inquiry, therefore, did not begin with Henderson's story, but with the world around it. He sent a telegram to the former employer in Kensington, not asking if Henderson was present, but requesting a copy of the evening's musical program and inquiring about the specific order of the pieces performed. He then paid a visit to the omnibus company's depot, consulting schedules and interviewing conductors on the route Henderson claimed to have taken. He was not looking for a witness who would say Henderson wasn't there. He was looking for the impossibility of him being in two places at once. The flaw, when he found it, was not in a person's memory, but in the immutable mechanics of time and motion. The host in Kensington confirmed the program and the timeline. The recital had indeed begun at 8:30 and concluded with a final aria that ended at precisely 12:17. The signed program was authentic. The witnesses were truthful. Henderson was there, but the omnibus conductor on the late route from Kensington to Mayfair had a different story. The last bus on that line departed Kensington at 12:25. The journey, as verified by the company's own logs and the conductor's sworn statement, took a minimum of 55 minutes due to the late hour and the specific route. This was the crack. For Henderson to have returned to Mayfair by 1 o'clock, as he stated, was a mathematical impossibility. The bus could not have made the journey in 35 minutes. It had never done so in its recorded history. For Henderson to have been at the recital until 12:17, and on his employer's doorstep in Mayfair by 1 o'clock, he would have needed a private hansom cab flying through deserted streets at a reckless speed, a mode of transport a frugal butler would never employ, and, crucially, one he never mentioned. Confronted with this chronological impossibility, Henderson's dignified composure shattered. The ironclad alibi, built on the truth of his presence at the recital, crumbled because of a lie about his method of return. He had been in Kensington, but he had not taken the omnibus home. He had left the recital early, slipping away during the final applause to catch an earlier bus, which would have placed him back in Mayfair by 11:40 squarely within the window of the theft. His lie was a simple one, meant to bolster his story by making his evening seem entirely ordinary and unremarkable. He never imagined that a detective would cross-reference a musical program with a bus timetable to uncover the 20-minute gap that proved his guilt. It was a testament to Holmes's method. The universe is a web of interconnected facts, and a single inconsistency, no matter how small, vibrates through the entire structure, revealing the falsehood at its center. Henderson wasn't the mastermind, but his panic and his perfectly timed absence proved he was a crucial pawn in the game, his hands far from clean. The one-eyed cat was never meant to be taken literally. Its true power lies not in what it depicts, but in the philosophy it represents. A chillingly precise world view adopted by the criminal mind we now hunt. This symbol of a singular, piercing gaze is the core of his identity, his method, and his terrifying nickname. To understand it is to step inside the mind of the keeper of the single eye himself. Consider the common assumption. A one-eyed creature is lacking, impaired, at a disadvantage. But in the language of symbols, the opposite is true. Losing one eye does not weaken the remaining one. It focuses it, hones its vision to a laser point. It trades a broad, general awareness for an intense, penetrating insight into a single, critical truth. This is the essence of our adversary's method. He does not see the world as a whole. He ignores the distracting noise of the everyday, the obvious security measures, the predictable patterns of the household. Instead, his entire perception is funneled toward identifying the one vulnerability, the single overlooked detail, the solitary point of failure that can bring an entire fortress of security tumbling down. He saw not a locked cabinet in a guarded home, but the precise emotional attachment to a music box that guaranteed its safety and concealed its true purpose. He saw not a staff of servants, but the one butler with a hidden resentment and a schedule that could be manipulated. His entire operation is a testament to this philosophy. Find the one weakness and apply absolute, overwhelming pressure. This singular focus extends beyond mere observation into a ruthless methodology. For the keeper, every operation is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He does not overwhelm with force, he paralyzes with precision. The one eye represents a refusal to be distracted by secondary targets or unnecessary complications. While a common thief might have emptied the entire cabinet, he took only the one item that mattered, because it was the only one that served his ultimate goal. This is why the first figurine was left behind. It was not a taunt in the traditional sense, but a statement of principle. It said, "I have taken only what I came for. I have replaced it with an object of equal, if darker, value. My work is balanced, exact, and complete." It was the signature of a perfectionist who views theft as a dark art form, where aesthetics and execution are as important as the prize. And this, ultimately, is how a symbol becomes a name, and a name becomes a legend. In the shadowy economy of London's underworld, reputation is a currency more valuable than gold. A thief who can be spoken of not as a man, but as a force of nature. A spectre who commands foxes and sees with a single, all-knowing eye, is a thief who can command exorbitant fees and the absolute loyalty of his terrified employers. The nickname, the Keeper of the Single Eye, is a brand carefully cultivated to inspire a mythos that grants him power and protection. It makes him untouchable, not because he is invincible, but because he is believed to be. He is not just a man who commits crimes. He is an idea that prevents questions. Those who hire him don't ask for details. They simply state a desire and trust in the legend. Those who might cross him are haunted by the implication that his singular gaze already sees their betrayal coming. The one-eyed cat is the perfect emblem for this terrifying persona, a creature of silent grace and unnerving focus, a familiar from old folklore made flesh, whose very presence promises that nothing and no one is ever truly hidden. The decoded sequence of shapes, a boastful recreation of his own crime, provided the perfect blueprint for his ego. Holmes saw not just a puzzle solved, but a psychological profile laid bare. The keeper was an artist who craved an audience for his brilliance, a man who would be irresistibly drawn to a display of intellectual prowess that mirrored his own. To catch such a creature, one must not set a snare, but build a stage and invite him to perform. "We shall give him a command performance," Holmes announced, his eyes alight with the cold fire of the hunt. "He has left us the script. We will simply provide the theatre." The plan, outlined later that evening to a captivated Watson and a deeply skeptical Inspector Lestrade, was a masterpiece of misdirection built upon the criminal's own vanity. The bait would not be the recovered music box, for its secret was likely already exploited. Instead, the lure would be the one thing the keeper could not resist, a public challenge to his perceived superiority. Holmes secured from the British Museum a unique artifact, a small ancient Egyptian scarab carved from lapis lazuli, its back inscribed with a series of peculiar, non-repeating hieroglyphs that had long baffled scholars. Its value was academic, but its mystery was perfect. The story would be carefully planted in the ears of certain underworld gossips. Sherlock Holmes, humiliated by the one-eyed cat affair, had retreated into obscure academic study to salvage his reputation, and was on the verge of a breakthrough with this scarab, which he believed contained a map to a lost pharaoh's treasury. He would be portrayed as distracted, vulnerable, and most enticingly, on the verge of a success that would eclipse the keeper's own legend. The stage would be Baker Street itself, the familiar setting turned into a carefully designed trap. Every detail was calibrated to appeal to the thief's specific methodology. The scarab would be placed not in a safe, but on the mantelpiece, visible from the window yet bathed in a carefully positioned light that would make a long-range shot from the street impossible, forcing a close approach. The window would be left slightly ajar, not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest a predictable point of entry that their fox-trained intruder would naturally exploit. Watson, armed and hidden behind a screen in the corner, would be the first line of defense. Lestrade and two of his most reliable men would be stationed in the street below, disguised as street sweepers, their focus on any unusual animal activity or a lone figure matching the keeper's description. But the true genius of the design, Holmes explained, leaning over the table to sketch a quick diagram, lies in the floor. He had procured a quantity of a special, ultra-fine powder used by botanists to track insect movements. This powder, almost invisible to the naked eye, would be dusted across the entire floor of the sitting room and the hallway leading to it. Anyone entering the room, whether human or animal, would leave a trail of footprints that would glow under the beam of a bull's-eye lantern. He may avoid the obvious tripwires and pressure plates, Holmes said, but he cannot avoid walking on air. The powder will not stop him, but it will reveal his exact path, his pace, and even his size the moment he enters. It turns the entire room into a page, and his movements will write his confession upon it. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably, his practical police mind struggling with the theatricality of it all. "It's a bit. Elaborate, Mr. Holmes. Wouldn't a good, strong lock on the door and a man with a truncheon behind it do the trick?" "For a common burglar, Inspector, most assuredly," Holmes replied without a trace of condescension. "But we are not dealing with a common burglar. We are hunting a man who is convinced he is the smartest person in any room. He expects locks and truncheons. He expects to outthink them. He will not expect to be outstaged. He will come precisely because it is elaborate, because the challenge of defeating my puzzle will be a siren's call to his monumental arrogance. He must prove not just to me, but to himself, that his singular vision can penetrate any web, even one woven specifically for him." The trap was set. It was not made of steel, but of pride, and they had only to wait for the spider to walk into his own web. The trap in Baker Street remained silent, its unseen dust undisturbed, but the scent of the chase had irrevocably shifted. The keeper, it seemed, had no interest in playing a game on Holmes's board. His vanity was not that of a stage magician, but of a grand strategist who preferred to choose his own battlefield. The next move came not from a break-in, but from a slip of paper delivered by a street urchin paid with a silver sixpence. The message was brief, a single line in that now familiar, precise script. "If you wish to see the music box again, meet me where the river forgets the city's name." Come alone, it was not signed, but it didn't need to be. The challenge was clear, and the location, after a moment's consultation of a river map, was unmistakable. The abandoned ship breaking yards at the Rotherhithe Bend, a desolate peninsula of rotting timber and rusted iron where the Thames widened and London's grip finally loosened. The journey there was a descent into another world. The comfortable glow of gaslight faded behind them, replaced by the thick, oily fog that clung to the river, a miasma of coal smoke and decay. The sounds of the city were drowned out by the mournful groaning of old hulls rubbing against broken docks, and the constant lapidary whisper of the water against a shore littered with the skeletons of forgotten ships. This was a place where things were brought to be forgotten, and it was the perfect stage for a final act. Holmes, with Watson and Lestrade shadowing him at a discreet distance, moved like a ghost through the labyrinth of decaying warehouses, his senses attuned to every drip of water and shift of shadow. The air was cold and heavy, each breath tasting of rust and salt. He found the keeper waiting on the deck of a beached whaling ship, its prow splintered and pointing accusingly at the shrouded sky. He was exactly as the legends had described, a tall figure wrapped in a dark cloak, his face obscured by the deep hood. At his heel, alert and unnervingly still, sat a red fox, its russet fur stark against the grey deck, its intelligent eyes fixed on Holmes. The music box sat on a crate between them, its mother-of-pearl inlay gleaming faintly in the weak light. For a long moment, the only sound was the river and the distant cry of a gull. "You have pursued the puzzle with a commendable tenacity, Mr. Holmes," the man said, his voice a cultured baritone that held no trace of the East End, but rather the clipped accent of a gentleman. "But you have pursued the wrong solution. You see a thief, I see a restorer of balance." He moved then, a single fluid motion to push back his hood. The revelation was not one of monstrous deformity, but of something far more chilling. His face was sharp, intelligent, and bore the tired lines of a scholar. And over his left eye he wore not a patch, but a custom-made monocle of polished obsidian, its dark surface reflecting the murky light like the eye of the figurines themselves. This was the single eye. It was not a missing organ, but a chosen lens, a symbol of his focused philosophy made literal. "My name is Alastair Finch," he stated, and the name would have been known to anyone who moved in certain academic circles. A brilliant, if controversial, historian and ethnographer, specializing in the symbols of forgotten cults and secret societies. He had vanished from public life years ago, presumed a recluse. And I did not steal this music box for gain. I retrieved it to prevent a far greater crime. His motive, as he laid it out with the cool precision of a lecturer, was not vengeance or greed, but a twisted form of altruistic justice. Mrs. Winthrop's late husband, the revered importer, had built his fortune on a foundation of theft and cultural desecration, plundering sacred artifacts from indigenous communities across the globe under the guise of trade. The music box was no mere trinket. Its unique melody was a stolen funeral dirge from a decimated Pacific culture. Its mechanism a replica of a sacred instrument. Finch saw himself not as a criminal, but as a repatriator, using his unique skills to take back what had been stolen and return it to its rightful heirs. The fox at his feet was not a trained circus animal, but a partner rescued from a trap, its instinctual cunning honed by a mutual trust. The soil, the hair, the seeming impossibility of it all. It was the methodology of a man who had chosen to live outside the flawed systems of man, using the tools of the natural world and the overlooked cracks in society to enact his own form of ethics. He was the keeper not of a singular eye, but of a singular, uncompromising vision of justice, one that operated in the shadows because the light of the law had failed. He saw the web of connections others missed, and he moved through it with the silent grace of the fox, a creature of two worlds, belonging to neither. In the thick fog of the dockyards, surrounded by the ghosts of plundered ships, Sherlock Holmes found himself not in a standoff with a villain, but in a debate with a dark reflection, a man who used the detective's own powers of observation and deduction not to uphold the law, but to dismantle its failures piece by stolen piece. The silence on that derelict ship was broken not by the river, but by a confession that reframed the entire puzzle. Alistair Finch did not speak like a cornered criminal. His tone was that of a weary professor, finally granted a chance to present his life's thesis to a worthy peer. "You believe you have untangled my scheme, Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice carrying over the lap of the water against the rotting hull. "But you have only followed the threads I laid for you to find. The true design was always far grander and far more necessary than a simple theft." His connection to the one-eyed cat symbol was not one of deformity, but of profound philosophical alignment. As an ethnographer, he had spent years studying the iconography of secret societies and lost cultures. "The single eye is not a symbol of lack," he explained, his own obsidian monocle catching the faint light. "It is the ultimate symbol of focus. It represents the ability to block out the cacophony of the world, the laws, the conventions, the comfortable lies, and see the one, piercing truth that others deliberately ignore." For him, that truth was the systemic plunder of cultural heritage by men like Mr. Winthrop, who dressed their greed in the respectable clothes of commerce and collection. The Winthrop fortune was a monument built with stolen bricks, each artifact in that Mayfair drawing room a silent scream from a pillaged culture. The music box was the key to it all, but not in the way Holmes had deduced. Its value was not in a hidden combination or a physical treasure. Its melody was a stolen funeral dirge, Finch revealed, his voice gaining a rare, passionate edge. A sacred song from a community in the Marquesas Islands that Winthrop's trade practices had helped decimate. He heard it on a voyage, thought it charming, and had it mechanized for his own amusement. He turned a prayer for the dead into a parlor trick. Finch's mission was one of repatriation. He had been hired by a descendant of that community, a man now living in London, to retrieve the box so its song could be returned to its proper, sacred context, and the copied mechanism destroyed. This was the leverage noted in his cellar not for blackmail, but for cultural restitution. His near-perfect plan was a testament to this focused ideology. The fox, a creature he'd rescued and formed a bond with based on mutual respect rather than domination, was the ideal accomplice. Nature provides the most elegant solutions, if one only has the patience to observe, he said. The animal's natural stealth and silence were superior to any human partner. It could slip through a slightly open cellar, grating that a man would never consider, creating a diversion at a precise moment, or even retrieving a small item. The soil from Hampstead Heath was from their training ground, a place where they learned to move as one. The entire operation was designed to look like the work of a supernatural folklore creature, because that very mythos provided the perfect cover. Who would believe a respectable academic was skulking about Mayfair with a fox? They would sooner blame a ghost, and a ghost cannot be caught or tried. He had anticipated the investigation's every turn. The frame around Edward Miller was a work of art in itself, a few whispered rumors in the right pubs, a carefully staged sighting by a constable, the subtle manipulation of the impressionable maid's memory. He knew the police would seize upon the simplest solution. "I even calculated your involvement, Mr. Holmes," he admitted, a note of genuine, rueful admiration in his voice. "I knew the sheer oddity of the case would eventually draw your attention. That is why the first figurine was left. It was an invitation, a challenge from one logician to another. I confess, I wanted to see if you could appreciate the beauty of the design before it was ultimately dismissed as the work of a disgruntled servant." His arrogance was not in thinking he was smarter than Holmes, but in believing that Holmes, of all men, would see the righteousness of his cause and the brilliance of his method. His ultimate failure was not a flaw in his planning. but a miscalculation of the detective's unwavering commitment to the law as the only valid framework for justice, however imperfect it might be. He had executed the perfect crime for what he saw as a perfect moral reason, only to be undone by the one variable he could not control, the human conscience of the one man clever enough to stop him. The gaslight in the drawing room of 221B Baker Street seemed to burn brighter that evening, as if trying to illuminate the very threads of reason that had woven this extraordinary tapestry. Mrs. Winthrop, Inspector Lestrade, and a sullen, cuffed Henderson were arranged around the room, a captive audience to the greatest intellect any of them would ever encounter. Holmes stood before the fireplace, not as a showman, but as a master restorer revealing the original image hidden beneath layers of grime and misdirection. The art of deduction, he began, his voice calm and precise, is not merely about seeing what is there. It is about understanding why it is there, and more importantly, why other things are not. He started not with the theft, but with the first figurine, the obsidian cat, which he held up for all to see. This was not a taunt. It was a statement of principle. The exquisite craftsmanship and the specific symbolism of the single eye immediately signaled an intellect of a high order, a mind that deals in concepts, not merely loot. A common thief, even a vengeful one, leaves behind nothing, or perhaps a crude threat. This was a signature, and it told me we were hunting a scholar, not a ruffian. He then produced the crude clay imitation. And this, delivered to our door, was the second half of that statement. The contrast between the two was a deliberate message. I can create art, and I can create its opposite. I control the narrative. Its purpose was not to frighten us into stopping, but to insult us into pursuing him with greater fervor, a challenge he was confident he could win. Turning to the physical evidence, he walked them through the scene with the clarity of a man who had been present during the crime itself. The locked cabinet, the lack of forced entry, the key on its hook, all pointed to a duplicate key, suggesting inside knowledge or recent access. But the dust on the shelf was the true revelation. The meticulous way it was disturbed, clean where the box had been and dusty around it, indicated a level of care and cool-headedness utterly at odds with a frantic, resentful footman. It was the work of a perfectionist who took pride in the aesthetic of his operation. Then came the soil. Holmes produced the small vial of granules. Hampstead Heath, a specific mineral composition found near the old viaduct. This told us our man had recent business there, a base of operations or a training ground. It was a geographical breadcrumb. He then addressed the most peculiar clue of all. And this, he said, using tweezers to hold up the single, fine hair for the room to see, was the detail that shattered the conventional explanation. A fox hair caught on the drape. Its presence in a locked Mayfair drawing room was not an impossibility to be dismissed. It was the key to be turned. It forced a complete re-evaluation of our quarry's methods. We were no longer looking for a man who picked locks. We were looking for a man who commanded the loyalty of the wild, who used its stealth as his own. This single hair pointed us toward the river and the legends of the East End, to whispers of a figure who walked with a fox at his heel. Holmes then turned his gaze to Henderson, not with accusation, but with a kind of clinical pity. The alibi was a work of art in its own right, flawless on the surface, supported by upstanding witnesses and physical evidence. It was designed to withstand any emotional or character-based assault. Its weakness was not in its people, but in its physics. The timeline was mathematically impossible. The omnibus from Kensington could not cover the distance in the time claimed. This was not a moral failure of your witnesses, Henderson. It was a failure of your arithmetic. You told the truth about being at the recital, but you lied about how you returned, because the truth of your return would have placed you at the scene of the crime. You were the inside man, providing the duplicate key and the layout of the house, but you were a tool, not the architect. Finally, Holmes addressed the grand revelation, the true identity and motive of the keeper of the single eye. We were meant to believe this was a story of simple vengeance or greed. The frame around Miller was expertly constructed. The debt, the sighting, the manipulated testimony of the maid. It was a puppet show designed to make us look at the dancing doll, not the puppeteer in the shadows. Alistair Finch was not a thief in the common parlance. He was a radical restitutionist. He saw a great wrong, the systemic plunder of cultural heritage by men like the late Mr. Winthrop, and he appointed himself the judge, jury, and bailiff of a court that exists outside our own. The music box was not valuable for its mechanism or its jewels. It was a sacred artifact, its melody a stolen funeral dirge. Finch's goal was to return it to its rightful cultural context. His entire methodology, the fox, the symbols, the misdirection, was built to create a legend, a spectral figure who could operate with impunity to correct what he saw as the failures of our legal and moral systems. Holmes paused, letting the full weight of the explanation settle over the room. He did not fail because his plan was flawed. It was nearly perfect. He failed because he underestimated the one variable he could not calculate with his singular focus: that I would value the process of the law over the poetry of his justice. He believed a mind like mine would appreciate the elegance of his solution, and perhaps even endorse it. But the world cannot function on the private moral calculus of individuals, no matter how brilliant or well-intentioned. The law, for all its imperfections, is the bedrock. It is the collective agreement we live by. Finch's tragedy is that his magnificent intellect, his incredible powers of observation and deduction, were turned inward to serve a personal vendetta disguised as a higher calling, rather than outward to strengthen the very system he believed was broken. Yet the fate of the obsidian cat itself remained a final, lingering question, an object that had sparked the entire affair. A symbol that had taunted and challenged, now sat inert on the evidence table at Scotland Yard, its purpose seemingly served. Its story, however, was not quite over. The figurine was, of course, entered into the official record of the case, a material witness to a most singular crime. But Holmes, with the quiet insistence that Lestrade had learned not to question, requested a final private examination of the artifact before it was locked away in some musty evidence vault, perhaps forever. He was not content to let the mystery of the object itself remain unsolved. Its craftsmanship was too precise, its symbolism too intentional to be merely a provocative calling card. Back in the familiar clutter of Baker Street, under the glare of the gas lamp, the figurine became the sole subject of his intense focus once more. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers probing every smooth contour and sharp edge. Watson observed, half expecting some hidden mechanism to click, a secret drawer to spring open. It would be a fitting final twist, the doctor mused aloud, if the key to the entire scheme was hidden inside the very symbol he left behind. Holmes, however, was pursuing a different line of inquiry altogether. Using a set of fine calipers, he measured the figurine's dimensions with meticulous care, comparing its weight to similarly sized pieces of solid obsidian he had acquired for comparison. A faint, almost imperceptible discrepancy emerged. The cat was slightly, but undoubtedly, lighter than it should have been. This minuscule anomaly was all the confirmation he needed. The obsidian cat was not solid. With painstaking patience, using a delicate tool and a surgeon's touch, Holmes applied pressure not to the body, but to the single eye of green jade itself. It was not simply set into the socket. It was a cunningly disguised pivot. With a soft, almost inaudible click, the gemstone eye rotated a quarter turn. And then, from a hairline seam that had been invisible to the naked eye, the entire base of the figurine slid open, revealing a hollow compartment within. The cavity did not contain a jewel or a map. It held a single, tightly rolled cylinder of the finest vellum. Unfurled, it revealed not a message of triumph or a further taunt, but a meticulously drawn architectural sketch of a grand mausoleum in Highgate Cemetery, with a specific crypt circled. And beside it, in Alastair Finch's elegant script, was a short, startling confession. The note revealed that the music box was indeed the primary objective, the item he had been commissioned to retrieve. But this, the one-eyed cat, was his own personal addition to the scheme, a final, private act of restitution. The crypt depicted belonged to Mrs. Winthrop's late husband. Within it, nestled beside his casket, was a funerary urn that the widow had always been told contained the ashes of a distant, beloved aunt. Finch's research had uncovered a far darker truth. The urn actually contained sacred remains, an ancestral relic that Winthrop had stolen from the same culture he had plundered for the music box's melody. Finch, in his twisted ethical code, could not let it remain desecrated. He had used the investigation, and Holmes himself, as the instrument for its discovery. The cat figurine was not just a signature. It was a delayed action clue, a time capsule of truth meant to be discovered only by someone with the perception to see it. He had ensured that even in his capture, his mission would be completed. The figurine's purpose was now utterly fulfilled. With the information in hand, the proper authorities and cultural representatives were contacted. The sacred remains were, with great solemnity and respect, exhumed and prepared for their long-awaited journey home. As for the obsidian cat itself, its role as evidence and symbol complete, it did not end up in a police storage room. Holmes arranged for it to be delivered to the British Museum, not as a trophy, but as a curated artifact in their collection of early 20th century criminal history. It sits there today, displayed beside a placard that tells an abbreviated version of its story. To the casual observer, it is merely a beautiful, if odd, sculpture. But for those who know the full tale, it stands as a permanent monument to the complexity of justice, a silent testament to a man who saw the world through a single, focused lens, and who used a detective's own brilliance to ensure that his final act of vengeance was, in the end, an irreversible act of peace. Justice in the world of Sherlock Holmes is rarely a simple matter of a criminal behind bars and a victim made whole. The aftermath of the puzzle of the one-eyed cat unfolded not with a single dramatic verdict, but with a series of quiet, profound resolutions that echoed the case's unique complexities. Alastair Finch, the man behind the myth, did not face a standard trial for burglary. The revelation of his true motive, cultural restitution, and the evidence of the Winthrop family's plundered legacy introduced a moral ambiguity that complicated the legal proceedings immensely. He was ultimately convicted, yes, but of a significantly reduced charge, his sentence reflecting the court's struggle to categorize a crime committed for a cause many secretly sympathized with. He would spend his years not in a common prison, but in a more open facility where his scholarly mind was put to work cataloguing artifacts for the British Museum. A curious twist of fate that allowed his singular focus to finally serve the system he had sought to bypass. The restoration for Mrs. Winthrop was twofold. The music box itself was, of course, returned to her drawing room cabinet, but its return was accompanied by a truth that was both devastating and liberating. Holmes and Watson sat with her, and presented the evidence found within the obsidian cat, the sketch of the mausoleum, and Finch's confession about the sacred remains. The woman's initial grief over the tarnished memory of her husband gradually gave way to a somber sense of duty. With Holmes acting as an intermediary, she willingly cooperated with cultural representatives to see the funerary urn repatriated to its rightful custodians in a private, deeply respectful ceremony. She did not get back the peaceful past she thought she had, but in its place, she gained a clear conscience and the knowledge that she had helped correct a terrible wrong. Her gratitude to Holmes was immense, but it was a quiet, thoughtful gratitude, expressed not with effusive praise, but with a firm handshake and a donation to a charity of his choosing. A gesture that acknowledged the depth of what he had truly recovered for her. And what of the symbol that started it all? The one-eyed cat figurine found its final home not in an evidence lockbox, but under a glass case in the British Museum, as Holmes had arranged. Its placard tells a brief version of the story, a permanent monument to a most unusual criminal and the detective who caught him. For those who know the full tale, it stands for the complex interplay between justice and the law, between a crime and its motive. Order was restored to Baker Street, the fog lifted from the streets of London, and the game was once again afoot. But the echo of the case lingered in the quiet moments, a reminder that the most brilliant puzzles are not those of how, but of why, and that the most satisfying resolutions often heal wounds far deeper than the ones initially presented. So the puzzle of the one-eyed cat reaches its end. And what a brilliantly intricate design it was. A facade of a simple theft constructed over a deep well of motive, where every clue was a deliberate piece of misdirection, and every piece of misdirection was, in itself, a clue. The real mystery was never about how a music box was stolen from a locked cabinet, but about why such an artistically complex mind would ever target it in the first place. We saw a story that began with a seemingly straightforward crime of passion, only to spiral outward into a tale of cultural reclamation, a distorted sense of justice, and a man who believed the law was too blunt an instrument for the delicate surgery he felt he needed to perform on the world's conscience. Alistair Finch, the keeper of the single eye, turned out to be one of the most fascinating adversaries Holmes has ever faced. Not a villain in the traditional sense, but a dark mirror reflecting a potential path Holmes himself could have walked, had he chosen to place his own intellect above the society it was meant to serve. This entire affair serves as a masterclass in the central tenet of Sherlock Holmes's philosophy, the crucial difference between seeing and observing. Anyone can see a locked cabinet and a missing object. It takes a true observer to notice the unnatural pattern in the dust, the single foreign grain of soil on the windowsill, or the almost invisible russet-tipped hair caught on the drape. Anyone can hear a story about a disgruntled former employee and see a perfect suspect. It takes a deeper level of thought to perceive the architecture of a frame-up, to understand that the easiest solution is often the one you are meant to find. The one-eyed cat was the perfect symbol for this entire concept, a representation of that laser-focused perspective that blocks out the noise of the obvious to find the truth hidden in the smallest, most unexpected details. It reminds us that the world is overflowing with information. The real skill is in knowing which pieces of that information are actually important. These stories endure because they are more than just clever puzzles. They are profound explorations of human nature, morality, and the endless pursuit of truth in a world that often prefers comfortable illusions. They challenge us to be more thoughtful, more curious, and more critical in our own lives. Now we turn the next page over to you. The world of Sherlock Holmes is vast and filled with countless enigmas waiting to be unraveled. Which story should we dive into next? Is there a particular case that has always captivated your imagination? The adventure of the speckled band, with its deadly swamp adder and its gothic atmosphere. The mystery of the Red-Headed League and its absurdly compelling setup. Or perhaps the significance of the 5 orange pips. Let us know down in the comments which story you'd love to see explored in a future video. Until then, the game is, and always will be, afoot.